Thank you for coming to our talk. I'm Tim, product manager on The Voice, and this is Krister, architect of Voice. You'll be hearing from him in a little bit. Last year, I was here at Signal to talk about toll fraud, a means by which a fraudster creates a virtual wire transfer from your bank account into theirs using telephony. This year, I'm here to talk about a different type of fraud, also enabled by telephony.
You have not paid your IRS taxes in years. You have been authorized to receive free tax help to avoid garnishment of your paycheck and bank accounts. No credit card is needed. I repeat, free tax help and no credit card is needed. Please hold.
Sound familiar? Nuisance? But just think, every single one of those calls is an attempt to steal from you. Sure, maybe you don't fall for it, but think about the people that do. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a family member. And that's why we're on stage today to tell you that Twilio is committed to joining the telephony ecosystem to put an end to unlawful robocalling. Over the next 25 minutes, we're going to tell you about the spectrum of robocalling. You're going to hear from Krister about emerging technical solutions. And you're going to hear about some actions being taken by the industry, by Twilio, and you. A robocall, a call created by computerized auto dialer that often plays a pre-recorded message. There are many calls that are created by computerized dialers that deliver time-sensitive information. For example, appointment reminders, PIN codes so that you can log in and do online banking, or school closing notifications. Also enabled by telephony is the ability to override the calling number, also called spoofing. There are many legitimate reasons why you might want to do this. For example, a doctor may want to call a patient using a personal mobile phone with a callback number corresponding to the office. Or an enterprise may want to use multiple outbound providers for both cost and redundancy reasons. Unfortunately, fraudsters have taken advantage of this capability to impersonate identities, such as the IRS. There's a full spectrum of calling. On one hand, you have unlawful robocalling. On the other hand, you have lawful notifications delivering time-sensitive information. You can have unlawful impersonation, as well as lawful overrides. We can all agree that these are both lawful and wanted. And we can also all agree the IRS scams and Social Security scams are both unlawful and unwanted. In fact, according to the Truth in Caller ID Act of 2009, you are prohibited from transmitting inaccurate calling number information with the intent to defraud, cause harm, or wrongfully obtain something of value. Penalties in excess of $10,000 per violation. For this talk, we're here to focus on how to put an end to these unlawful robocalls. Before we turn over to Krister to talk about technical solutions, how do we get to this robocall epidemic? Well, it starts with computerized dialers, cheap PSTN calling, an aging population of vulnerable victims, imperfect robocall detection methods, the ability to impersonate an identity by overriding the from number, as well as unenforceable laws. These top three are unchangeable. The good news is that we can influence the bottom three. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Krister to talk about the technical solutions.
All right. Thank you, Tim. My name is Krister, architect in the Voice and Video Business Unit. So we're going to talk about the potential technical solutions that exist to address robocalling. We're going to start with something called call analytics. It's a way of detecting robocalls that is being put in place by most of the service providers within the US. So hands up anyone who's received a call that looks like this. That was quite a few. So you might wonder, how does this actually work? How come we know that this is a scam? So the solution is something called call analytics. So there's a system that's basically listening to all the incoming calls to a service provider. collecting all of them in a system called call analytics. And if the system is seeing that it's receiving a lot of incoming calls from a particular calling number, perhaps going out to many different people, that might be a spam situation, or might be could also possibly be a wanted call notification, for example, a school closing. So how do you differentiate between unwanted and wanted calls? Well, in these cases, call analytics typically has some kind of a customer feedback loop to tell whether a particular call type is spam or unwanted. So if a customer is reporting that this caller is making unwanted calls, then the system will determine that this is likely to be a scam. So if the system made that determination, scam likely, this will eventually turn up on your caller display. So that's how call analytics work. And this is an important piece of stemming this tide of robocalls. And you might compare this to how spam detection started with email. So once there's a system who can assist you in determining which calls are wanted and unwanted, it's a useful tool in your tool belt. So that means we've addressed that we can actually detect robocalls somehow. But as Tim mentioned, you can also impersonate calling numbers. So the fact that you can impersonate calling numbers means that that system we just talked about is not entirely foolproof, because you can actually spoof the phone number, and then you can actually change the phone number for every call. So it wouldn't be as effective. So how do we address this? So we're going to talk about how this works. But first, wait, can you actually impersonate a calling number? Why is that even possible? So let's step back 30 years ago. The telephony system was basically much smaller. It was a private closed network, and you had proprietary technology in the telephony network. Very few had access to this telephony network. And you had a set of very few baby bells trusting each other. And that's how there was no real need to have any kind of sort of end-to-end agreement about calling numbers. So if you fast forward to today, this is not a perfect picture of the telephony network, because that's actually not possible to put on a slide, but it's showing that there's a lot of different providers. It's relatively easy to access telephony network today. It's based on standard technology using IP. And there are literally thousands of service providers that gives you access to the PSTN today. And there are many, many ways a call could be going through this network to reach you. At the end result is that when a call arrives, you cannot be 100% sure that the caller is who he says he is, or that he has access authority to use this number. So the situation is like this. Calls are forwarded hop by hop between different service providers, and there's no end-to-end calling verification, which means that we end up in these situations. And as we said, the calling number can be overridden, and that's the key reason why this can even happen in the first place. As Tim mentioned, it is illegal to use a calling number or someone else's calling number with the intent to defraud or scam someone. But at the end, it's actually really hard to track this down today, simply because we're going hop by hop, and whoever is receiving a call only sees the last hop. So it's actually quite hard. So how do we fix this? What would the ideal be? What we do want to do is to have a situation similar to for example, when you browse the web and you see you're going to an authorized website, you see a green check mark, it's TLS, HTTPS, it is legit. You know that you're connecting to the right website. And the same experience is what we would like to see on the phone as well. We'd also like to know that the actual calling number is verified, that we know that whoever is making this call knows or owns this phone number. So we have a technology called Shake and Stir that's coming to the rescue to actually implement a solution to this. And it actually turns out that we have the authors of this spec standing in the back here, interestingly enough. There will be a panel later on today when you can hear from the authors. It's at 4:55. Right, so what is Stir Shaken? It stands for signature-based handling of asserted information using tokens, or that's shaken, and secure telephony identity revisited, STIR. And it's basically a call authentication framework. And without this call authentication, you can't be sure that the caller isn't impersonating someone else. So, Shake and Stir is introducing trust into telephony. And it's reusing patterns for the web and email authentication. So it's using certificates, it's using JSON web tokens, which is typical authorization technology for all kinds of web applications. And if you've ever heard about authenticated email, you might have heard about DKIM and DMARC, which is used to solve the same problem in email, meaning can you be sure that the from in an email is from someone who is authorized? So let's walk through how Stir Shaken actually works. So let's say Tim is placing a call to me. Tim has a Verizon mobile phone. I have an AT&T mobile phone. So what happens is that Tim's service provider is Verizon. It's the originating service provider. It takes Tim's call parameters, the from and the to, and what time it was placed, and uses a signing service to sign this call. So it has, Verizon has a certificate, it signs the parameters, and forwards the call parameters through the telephony network and on to the terminating service provider. So this call arrives at AT&T, including these cryptographically signed parameters. And AT&T then has a verification service. It downloads Verizon's cert and verifies that the calling parameters are correct. That means that AT&T can know that Verizon promised that this call is authorized. So when this call then arrives at my cell phone, the phone can somehow indicate that the call is verified. So that is how Stir Shaken works end to end. So let's dig one level deeper for the people in the crowd that knows SIP. I assume everyone does? No? Yeah? Many of you. Right. So SIP is basically a way of originating calls in the telephony network. And passed through this telephony network is what's called an identity header. And this is the container for the information that's traveling end to end to verify the call. So we're going to dig into what's in this identity header. So the first thing we see is a header. It's saying it's a JSON web token. It's a shaken passport. It has a link to a URL where you can find the certificate that was used to sign this token. And if we step further, you see that we have the payload, the important piece of this. This is what's being signed. So the first thing there is an attestation. It's called an A attestation. We'll talk in a minute about what A means. And then there's the destination and the origination phone number for this, as well as a orig ID, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. And finally, you'll have the actual cryptographic signature, a URL to the certificate again, as well as what algorithm was used and the passport type. So this is what's being passed end-to-end from the originating service provider through to the terminating service provider and enabling this call authentication. So what kind of attestation levels do we have? So we have the most important attestation level is level A, which means that I know who the customer is and I know that he or she is allowed to use this phone number. And this is the kind of attestation that we expect to be the one that actually turns out with a green check mark on your phone when that time comes. And we also have other attestations levels like B. I know the customer, but I'm not sure that he owns the calling number. And finally, C. I don't know the customer, but I received this call from somewhere, and I'm going to sign that I originated the call into the PSTN network. So these are the kind of claims that an originating service provider can make about a call. So to sum this up, how does Shake and Stir actually help? And first and foremost, it introduces a network of trust between these service providers that is enabling this call authentication to happen. And a service provider, like in the example of the call from Tim to me, Verizon is putting their reputation on the line when it's signing A. So this is the key piece behind Stir Shaken. It's a trust network. And given the information that's contained in these passports, it will be much quicker and easier to identify bad actors. So the summary of this is that a shake and sign call is so much less likely to be a fraudulent call. So we talked about the robocall detection, and we talked about the impersonation. So we addressed those two. And finally, how can we make sure that we find the bad actors in this system? So you've already seen the answer. In the payload that we saw there before, you have the actual who was signing the shaken passport. So at the terminating service provider, we know who actually originated and signed this call. In addition, we also have something called the orig ID. And this orig ID will point to the individual customer at the service provider who originated this. So in this case, it will be pointing towards Tim. So that's how we can actually find who are originating these calls using Stir and Shaken. So with that, the idea is that we can actually enforce the laws that exist for stemming robocalls. To sum this up, we talked about 3 tools, but like every technology, there is really no silver bullet. Jim McAkern, one of the principal technologists behind this standard, basically is saying that it's more like email spam. It will still be there, but it's more manageable. But now we have the tools, and we can manage the problem. So that's the summary of the technical solutions. Now over to Tim for actions.
Thanks, Krister. So you heard about some of the emerging technical solutions, but there's more than just technical. There's collaboration across regulatory, legislative, policy, across wireless, wireline, and VoIP entities. So what's Twilio up to? On the technical front, Twilio is a member of ATIS, the standards body responsible for authoring Shaken and Stir. We have a seat on the board of directors of ATIS. We're evaluating multiple solutions to Shaken and Stir, and we're collaborating with our carrier partners. On that front, we already have IP-based interconnects with all of our carriers to accelerate Shaken readiness. On the regulatory front, we attended the FCC Robocall Summit, and we are supportive of the Traced Act and the Stopping Bad Robocall Act. On the policy side, Krister went to DC and he demonstrated Twilio use cases to both House and Senate representatives. We attended the US Telecom Robocall Summit, and we participated in the FCC Robocall proceeding. All right, let's turn our attention now to what you can be doing. Let's start with outbound calls. You care about high call answer rates. That means your calls don't get mislabeled by the analytics, they don't get blocked, they're trusted by the consumer, and even better if they're branded. Let's start with the display framework. Here's an example of a Comcast Xfinity prototype display framework. As you can see, the green check mark indicates that the calling number can be trusted under Shaken. Expect to see this sometime in the future. Now imagine that you could display your business name, your business logo. How about the call reason? This is available now. If you're interested, I encourage you to go to the verified calling session tomorrow here, and also look to do a demo in the downstairs booth. Let's talk about best practices for call delivery success. Only use a valid assigned calling number. Don't call unassigned numbers. Don't use the same calling number on multiple calling campaigns. Always comply with the Do Not Call registry, both state and federal, and the TCPA guidelines. And always remember, your consumers can provide direct feedback to the analytics, which will influence the reputation of your future calls. All right, now you might be wondering, well, what happens? How do I know if my calls are getting blocked by the analytics? So I have good news and I have bad news. The bad news is that the industry is not yet standardized on a single SIP code to represent calls being blocked by the analytics. The good news is there is a draft proposal to use SIP code 608. The other set of good news is Twilio already has a product. It's called Voice Insights that allows you to filter on failed calls and filter by SIP code. Stay tuned for more on this. Calls may also get mislabeled. And the reality is that each of the mobile operators use different analytic vendors. Verizon uses one, AT&T uses another, T-Mobile uses yet another. In the wireline space, Robo is very popular. Also, a smart app like Umail. If you ever have issues with calls getting blocked or mislabeled, please reach out to Twilio and we'll provide you some guidelines. Let's turn our attention now to unwanted inbound calls to your phone numbers. First tip, don't let your numbers get scraped on the web by bots. Obfuscate your numbers in images or require the users to click to reveal the phone number. If you're a programmable voice customer, consider installing a marketplace add-on such as White Pages Pro, Ikata, Robo, MarchX. You can send suspicious callers to a voice CAPTCHA, require them to enter 2 digits before the call can be transferred. If you're an Elastic SIP chunking customer, consider installing the FCC blacklist on your PBX. And if you want to learn more, you already heard that 3 of the Stir Shaken authors are in our presence today, and they'll be on a panel today at 4:55 p.m. in room 2005. I highly encourage you to attend. It should be a very engaging discussion. Thank you very much for coming to our talk. I hope you found it informative. Enjoy the rest of the conference.